All right, let's keep going with this. Going over numbers 4 here on this chapter or day 10 assignment. Okay, so here we had this where, oh, and you know what? I realized that I think I have this problem wrong, so I need to fix this here. So I realized that if you are scoring better than at least 70%, then that means that 70% are below you. So that would be the bottom percent. So see, you are scoring better than at least 70%, then you have 70% below you. And if you have 70% below you, then that means this is inverse norm of 0.70, which is a positive 0.52. So I need to fix this here. So this is a positive 0.52. And then when I added this together, then it was 552 points. So you needed to score 552 points to be better than at least 70% of the students who took the test. Okay. All right. So now here with these lengths of these components here, then we had two X values, 4.98 and 5.02. So we had to find both of those Z scores. And then remember they say probability. So find that proportion of observations. That's norm CDF to get that area between those two Z scores. And here to find the area between these two z-scores, that was from a -2 to a +2. So, you can do the math, but remember that within 2 standard deviations, it's also 95%. So, and like this one up above was all those within 1 standard deviation is that 68. So 68, 95, 99.7. All right, now here we are talking about this physics exam. And so it had an average of 70 with a standard deviation of 10. Okay, what grade did you have to get? So this X is unknown to be in the top 10%. So if you're in the top 10%, then you have 90% below you. So you have inverse norm of 0.90. So that's a z-score of 1.28, and then you go put it into your z-score formula here and then solve the algebra for x. Okay, so you have to make it 82.8 to be in the top 10%. Now for the bottom 25th percentile. Remember, percentile is the area below. So here, if they tell you the bottom, then you don't need to change that area around. That is the percent that you want. So inverse norm of 0.25 is the Z at that spot. So I go put it into this formula here, and I solve to get 63.3 points. All right, now middle 50%. So see, that is putting this 50% in the center. So you have two Z scores. This lower one at a negative 0.67 and this upper one at a positive 0.67. Now, I had already done this problem with the negative 0.67. So that's why I already knew this answer here of 63.3. But then you did the positive 0.67 and you did the algebra. You set this up with the positive 0.67, and that's how you get that many points. All right, moving on. Okay, now this problem here, a couple things that caught people off guard. Okay, so one is they saw this, we want to go above 98.6 degrees. That is an X value. I had students who wanted to say, "Oh, this is above 98.6. I need the area below is 1.4." Okay, read what this problem is about. This is temperatures, taking your temperature. And this is a temperature that you have taken. And so that is the context value. And then the question is asking about what proportion of people would you expect to be above that temperature? So, a couple things. That was mistake number one my students would make. Mistake number two is students would get this Z score of 0.57 and they would be done. They would say, they may just stop at 0.57. Or they would say 57%. No. This z-score is telling you that this temperature is located about a half of a standard deviation above the mean. So to find this proportion of people, you need to norm CDF to get this area, this amount of people. Okay, so it's 28.43% of people. Next, we have the coolest 20% of people. So you could tell from that language that 20% is the lower area. So that 20% inverse norm of the 0.20 is a negative 0.84. And then we do the algebra to solve for the x at that location, 97.6 degrees. All right, now this next one is interesting. So this is going to be about IQ scores. This is true information, and I think the question on the next page is particularly interesting. Okay, so let's take a look at that here. So in the normal model, the IQs have an average of 100 with a standard deviation of 16. Okay, so let's see. What IQ do you have to be in the highest 5%? Well, we have to then say, well, that's 95% below you. So you have a z-score of 1.64. So that's then what I put into this z-score formula, and I solve for x. So there is my then 126. So this is what your IQ has to be in the top 5% of people, okay, as far as IQ. All right, what about the lowest 30%? So that right there is a lower area. So you just are ready to go with doing your inverse norm of 0.30. And that's negative 0.52. So then you put that into this equation here and you solve that. So you have 91.68 points if you're in the lowest 30% of IQ. Okay, how about this middle 80%? So, think about what this is saying. If you have 80% in the middle, then what is left on the outside edges? 80% in the middle gives 20% left. So that's 10% down here and 10% on top. So then we do inverse norm of this lowest 10%, 0.10, that's negative 1.28. So solve this problem with a z-score of negative 1.28. And solve this problem with a positive z-score of 1.28. That then gets you your two different values, the IQ. So if you're in the middle 80% of people, you've got between that z-score or that IQ and this IQ, about 80 to 120. Okay? All right. But this next page, this is so interesting to me because this is true stuff here. And I think the last question on this page is really very interesting. So here, federal standards does define a person who has this label as mentally retarded as somebody with an IQ of less than 80. So using the data we have, then we solved for the proportion of people in the U.S. that would have that label of mentally retarded. Okay, so we want to go through that. So we found our z-score for an x value of 80. And so then that tells us that the classification of that below 80 on an IQ, about 10.56% of the population has that. You had to norm CDF from negative 99 to negative 1.25. Okay? But now this is where it gets interesting. The federal government only funds the lowest 4%. So the question is, what IQ do you have to receive federal funds? So that is, what is the unknown X value? So we know that if you are in the inverse norm of the lowest 0.04, then we solve that. And so you have to have an IQ of 72 points or below to be considered to get funds from the Americans with Disabilities Act. Okay, but here it is. Look here. If 10.56% of IQs are classified as mentally retarded, but only 4% of them receive federal funds, then I'm interested in what's happening in between those things. What proportion of Americans are legally labeled, officially labeled in this mentally retarded section, but do not get federal funds for that disability? And so that's where there's that disjoint between those who qualify and those who get the funds. There's a difference there. So we're wondering who's in that little section right there. That's what this last question is asking. So 10.56% are labeled, but only 4% get assistance. So that makes 6.56% of Americans who are labeled as mentally retarded but do not get federal funds with the Americans with Disabilities Act. So, interesting question there. All right, so I'll stop this video and then we can go on to that last page, or that number 9 here on the next video.